Hey everyone, welcome back. So glad you're joining me for today's explainer because we are looking at something absolutely crucial. We're talking about a massive, unprecedented threat to global food security, specifically the blue economy. We're going to dive deep into the impending 2026 Super El Niño and its direct impacts on global aquaculture. But listen, we aren't just going to sit here and focus on the doom and gloom, right? We're also breaking down a highly actionable survival guide for producers. We're going to take this complex, honestly intimidating meteorological storm and transform it into clear, practical steps that can literally save multi-million-dollar harvests. Let's get right into it. Here's the roadmap for today. We'll start with the mechanics of the 2026 El Niño, then we'll look at the physical and biological impacts, followed by the looming aquafeed supply crisis. After that, we'll get into our practical survival guide for producers, and finally, we'll wrap up with projections and our long-term climate future. All right. Section 1, the 2026 El Niño phenomenon. To really figure out how to survive this thing, we gotta understand the underlying mechanics first. So, we're talking about INSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation. And guys, this triggers a terrifying domino effect. It's not just about the ocean getting a little bit warmer, It's a coupled ocean-atmosphere climate pattern. Normally, you've got these strong trade winds pushing warm water to the west. But during El Niño, those winds basically lose their steam. They weaken. So all that warm water rushes right back eastward toward the Americas. And when it does that, it depresses the thermocline. That's the boundary layer separating the warm surface water from the cold, deep water. Why is that a big deal? Well, it completely cuts off the upwelling of essential nitrate and phosphate salts. Without those basic nutrients, phytoplankton just can't grow, and the entire marine food web essentially faces starvation. It's a total collapse from the bottom up. Now, based on research by Bertrand and colleagues, ENSO actually comes in 5 distinct flavors. A moderate El Niño, whether that hits the eastern or central Pacific, is going to alter resources and rainfall, sure, but it's generally manageable. But an extreme El Niño? That's a whole different beast. We're talking sea surface temperature anomalies of up to +3 degrees Celsius. This extreme variant triggers torrential rains, catastrophic droughts, and basically poses a massive risk to global infrastructure. And then we also have coastal El Niño and strong La Niña, which bring their own massive, highly localized regional disruptions. Okay, moving on to Section 2, physical and biological impacts. Now that we know the types of storms we're dealing with, let's look at what actually happens to our aquaculture systems when the water changes. The really wild thing here is that this phenomenon does not hit everywhere the same way. It's literally a tale of two extremes. On one side of the Pacific, over in the Americas, farms face intense extreme rains. We're talking rivers overflowing, earthen ponds flooding out, and coastal infrastructure just getting physically destroyed by storms. But then, you look at the other side of the globe, Southeast Asia. Operations over there, like the ones in Malaysia's Pahang River, are battling the exact opposite problem: severe, prolonged droughts. The water gets way too hot, which leads to thermal anoxia, meaning dissolved oxygen just plummets. Plus, you get chemical toxicity and a critical degradation of freshwater sources. So, it's this brutal dual threat: catastrophic flooding on one side of the world and parching drought on the other. And hey, this isn't just theoretical. Let's talk real numbers for a second. 12%. That is the staggering chunk of total Chilean salmon production that was completely wiped out during the 2016 El Niño event. Those climate-induced conditions triggered massive, harmful algal blooms. That 12% loss, it translated to an $800 million economic disaster for the sector. When you can't physically move your cages, you are completely at the mercy of the water quality. And honestly, those algal blooms are just the tip of the iceberg. The extreme swings in temperature and salinity put massive stress on the animals. And just like us, when they get stressed, their immune systems tank, opening the floodgates for pathogens. For example, thermal stress triggers this devastating ice disease in Kenyan and Philippine seaweed. Over in Canadian oysters, those warmer waters lead to a lethal proliferation of Vibrio bacteria. And in salmonids, we see a massive, explosive acceleration in the reproductive rates of parasites like sea lice. The heat literally acts as an incubator for disease. All right, Section 3. Aquafeed supply crisis. Beyond the water conditions themselves, the sector faces a huge existential threat to its actual supply chain. 5 million metric tons. Remember how we just discussed the collapse of nutrient upwelling? Well, that collapse absolutely starves out small pelagic fish, like the Peruvian anchoveta. These fish either die off or they migrate to deeper waters to survive. Because of these intense climate disruptions, global fish meal production has essentially flatlined. It's hit a strict hard ceiling of just 5 million tons annually. And the problem is, we're incredibly dependent on that limited supply. Aquaculture eats up over 70% of global fish meal output. So when El Niño hits and those anchoveta disappear, the supply shrinks drastically. And you can probably guess what happens next, right? A profound financial shock. Scarcity causes aquafeed prices to absolutely skyrocket worldwide, leaving producers in a massive economic uncertainty. If you literally can't afford to feed your stock, the entire operation is on the brink.
Okay, Section 4, Practical Guide for Producers. We've outlined the threats, the storms, the diseases, the feed shortages. Now let's pivot sharply to the solution phase. It's time for our actionable survival guide.
If you're managing an operation, you need a coordinated defense playbook, basically broken down into 3 escalating steps. Step 1 is early warnings. That means analytical anticipation, deploying IoT sensors and advanced predictive models, so you know exactly what the water is doing before it hits you. Step 2 is biological diversification, shifting away from vulnerable monocultures and building in species flexibility. And step 3 is mechanical mitigation, which comes down to direct physical infrastructure optimizations on the farm to protect your biomass. Let's break these down a bit more. The absolute crucial point here is knowing exactly what to do the second your data says a thermal anomaly is hitting. Here are your rapid-fire direct pond management tactics. First up, you need those oceanographic buoy networks with IoT sensors in the water right now for real-time monitoring. If a heat wave is forecasted, execute early harvests. Get your biomass out before they reach a critical size where the mortality risk spikes. You also want to suspend new stocking to avoid oversaturating your pond density. When that water gets hot, apply nutritional adjustments. Basically, feed them less to prevent water eutrophication. You absolutely must install induced mechanical aeration to fight off hypoxia when oxygen drops. And if you're using cages, physically relocate them to areas with more dynamic water flows to get some natural cooling. These are direct, empowering actions you can take to save your inventory. Moving to step 2, biological diversification. Look, you can't fight the ocean, right? You have to adapt to it. Dynamic crop adaptation means you're actively rotating your stocked species based on seasonal macroclimate forecasts to distribute your financial risk. In a La Niña scenario, a cold year, you prioritize temperate water, high-yielding species that absolutely thrive when there's nutrient upwelling. But if an El Niño, warm year is on the horizon, you pivot. You quickly retrofit those ponds for thermotolerant organisms like tilapia or the white-leg shrimp. You've got to align your biology with the changing environment. But here's the reality. Producers cannot survive this in a vacuum. It requires a highly coordinated 3-tiered governance response. At the farm level, it's exactly what we just talked about: daily biomass management, integrated system diversification, and water control. But that effort has to bridge up to the sectoral level. Competing farms actually need to collaborate here, sharing real-time data networks and transferring technology so the whole industry can prepare. And finally, at the national level, governments have to step up with regulatory frameworks, parametric subsidies, and financial insurance markets. Parametric insurance is huge here, meaning payouts trigger automatically based on weather data, transferring that massive risk away from the individual farmer. And that brings us to Section 5, Projections and Climate Future. Let's zoom out from the pond level and look at the terrifying macroeconomic realities we're facing in the coming decades. This timeline really paints a picture of escalating destruction. Back in 2016, we saw that 12% loss of Chilean salmon from algal blooms. Just a year later, the 2017 coastal El Niño caused the total, absolute collapse and bankruptcy of the Peruvian scallop industry down in Sechuara Bay. Now, in 2026, global alarms are sounding for a massive potential Super El Niño. And if you look ahead to 2099, next-generation climate models project a staggering cumulative global loss of $84 trillion if this increased ENSO volatility continues. $84 trillion! That massive dollar figure proves that ENSO's impacts transcend coastlines. It doesn't just kill fish. When aquaculture fails, food security drops and feed prices soar. This climate phenomenon directly alters major macroeconomic indicators. Studies show that ENSO directly spikes the National Consumer Price Index, causing widespread market inflation and destabilizing entire economies, which is actually statistically evidenced in South Korea. The global ripple effects are just truly staggering. We are clearly no longer dealing with a simple, seasonal fluctuation. This is a planetary shift. As the research notes, the success of these mitigation strategies depends completely on an accurate understanding of ENSO dynamics. We have the technology, We have the IoT sensors, the dynamic crop rotation strategies, the farm-level tactics. But we have to replace reactive panic with detailed knowledge.
That detailed understanding is what will enable the industry to plan sustainably and guarantee long-term food security.
So as we stare down the climate crossroads of 2026, I want to leave you with this lingering question. Is your production ecosystem prepared for the shift? Don't wait for the water temperatures to rise. Apply this survival guide today, distribute your risk, and adapt. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay vigilant, stay proactive, and keep learning.